Hi there, this is Lee, and today I'm talking about the floods in Louisiana. It is August, and August is a very volatile month in the southeast United States. And unfortunately, there has been massive rainfall, which has resulted in flooding in parts of Louisiana and other parts of the southeast United States. It's bringing up a lot of memories of Katrina and the results of the weather system on that city, and then what happened to the people immediately following the natural disaster. And what people do know, if you've viewed the film When the Levees Broke, the documentary by Spike Lee, which gives a very thorough discussion of the weather system itself, the city, the people, and the public policy that actually created the disaster. There was, again, a massive weather system, but the city in 2005, August, survived the weather system, the hurricane, Katrina. The city survived it like it survived many hurricanes. The failure came when the levees broke. The hurricane blew over. It was when the levees broke or were broken, and there's questions on what exactly happened with that. Speculation that the Army Corps of Engineers had a role in that, breaking the levees, flooding the city. But it was not Hurricane Katrina that caused that natural disaster. It was a failure of infrastructure. It was a failure of the levees, the public works, the sewer system, the pumps to pump the water out of the city. Many failures. The city itself had an aging infrastructure. The levees were made of earth. They weren't maybe what we would call sophisticated or modernized on a scale that you would see perhaps in the Netherlands, where the entire country would actually be submerged if not for their levee system. And so the resulting disaster played out on television, but it also played out on the internet. The internet was sophisticated enough to contain videos of what occurred there, pictures, photos, videos, and the media propaganda was pretty cruel and vicious towards the people in Katrina. These were people, in New Orleans after Katrina, these were people who witnessed family members dying, being swept away, being injured, and no ability to assist them. Some had to make choices. Do I save my son or my daughter? Do I save my parents or my children? This resulted in post-traumatic stress. These are people who witnessed horrors happening, the weather system itself, the flooding, and then the death, and then being treated as criminals by the people who arrived there to supposedly help them. And instead, the people who arrived, the National Guard and other public officials, treated these people who are suffering death, destruction, loss of everything, loss of food, shelter, clean water, medicine, and then loss of family members. They were suffering, and then they were treated as criminals, not only by these officials and their police force, the National Guard. They were also treated that way by the mainstream media that projected pictures all around the world and put captions saying that these, were looters. These weren't people who were looking for food because there was nowhere else to get food. They were saying that these were looters and criminals. They placed more importance on property than people. That's the image and the story and the narrative that the mainstream media projected post-Katrina around the world. It was pretty terrible. There are many stories. I recommend, again, Spike Lee's When the Levees Broke to get a real good, thorough discussion of that disaster. Partially natural, mostly man-made. So that was Katrina, Louisiana, August 2005. 11 years later, we have another weather system that's resulted in a natural disaster. And once again, we have to ask, is it the infrastructure, again, that we've known for years was not sufficient to handle the weather system at that location in the southeast United States? And I've seen so many stories or reactions from people online saying, well, why are you living there when you know it floods? Okay, why do people live anywhere in the United States? Why do people live in California when they know that there are fires there, wildfires, massive wildfires? Why do they live there when they know that there's earthquakes in California? Why do people live in Alaska when they know that there are blizzards? Same thing with New York. There's blizzards. New Jersey, we had blizzards there. We have tornadoes all through the all through the Midwest and through the center of the United States. There's droughts in Texas. There's hurricanes that come up through the coast that strike at Houston, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida. There's weather systems all across the United States. There's natural occurrences that everyone has to deal with. So for someone from another part of the country to look at Louisiana and say, why would anyone live there? Well, we all have to live somewhere. And we all have to coexist with Mother Nature. The only thing is, maybe when there's a tornado that rips through your house, maybe you don't have to endure people saying, pointing their finger at you while you're suffering, while you're trying to regather your life. Maybe people aren't pointing at you and saying, well, why did you live there? That's not fair. I think you're better than that. We can all be better than that, I think. So people live there. They're humans, and they deserve to be treated that way. They deserve to be reported as such. The mainstream media, who has been reprimanded and taken to task for many years following the Katrina coverage, have chosen to instead downplay what's happening in Louisiana in favor of other news stories, which, what can you do? This is our mainstream media. We know that they are a tool of propaganda. They've been exposed, basically. But anyway, the fact that this is possibly a disaster that's been exacerbated by a failure of infrastructure, I think, should be examined closely. Following the failure of the levees in New Orleans as a result of either man-made occurrence or they failed through accident, we don't know really, although there's been stories on both sides of that issue. Dutch television actually aired an interesting episode where they examined the levees in New Orleans, finding them extremely insufficient. I mean, basically a pile of dirt that's supposed to hold the water back. And then they compared that levee system to what they have in the Netherlands, which is extremely sophisticated enough to hold back the entire ocean off of a piece of land, and it protects the people of the Netherlands. And so, you compare their sophisticated system. I mean, it was really high tech. They demonstrated their system of, the water goes in and then this closes and it locks and, this, and it sends the water here. It looked very high tech, and it looked very expensive, but it also looks realistic because it exists. This type of water handling system exists, and it's protecting the people in the Netherlands today. And they said this can also be done in Louisiana. And they made another demonstration of what needed to change in order to protect the city of New Orleans and the surrounding areas to hold back the Gulf. And they said this is something that can be done and should be done to protect the people. Was it done? No. Instead, we had drone wars in the Middle East. People say, well, that's expensive. We can't afford that, which is the answer to just about everything that benefits the people, as opposed to the oligarchy, which includes our military-industrial complex. They say, well, we can't afford it. And I think the long answer to that is, well, no, we can't afford it, and commit to drone wars in the Middle East, and then sending our time, money, energy, personnel, human resources over to the Middle East to rebuild what we destroy. We bomb and we bomb and we bomb, and then we rebuild their infrastructure, as opposed to not bombing in the first place, and then instead rebuilding the infrastructure that we have here at home that has been proven time and again to be insufficient to protect us. Our public works, our roads, our bridges, our canals, our levees, our communications, everything, our transport networks, all these things should be rebuilt and sophisticated to and made sophisticated to the point where it can withstand natural disasters that we know from history that will come over and over and over again. And not just Louisiana, there are means of protecting ourselves by improving our infrastructure, improving our overall lives, with rebuilding and strengthening and modernizing these structures. And it can be done. It should be done. It's realistic. It's not some Star Trek, Star Wars, way out in outer space kind of pipe dream. It can be done. It's just, can we get the money reallocated from an area of our overall economy that is really overabundant with taxpayer funds? Can we persuade that money away from military defense into our infrastructure so we can better protect ourselves? It's something that can be done. Jill Stein has the Green New Deal, which is one solution. Also, another solution to not having our wars for oil or dominance on another continent. All this money that we've been sending to fight in Africa should be spent here at home. That's what needs to happen. So instead of rebuilding our infrastructure, we had the drone wars, and then 11 years later, we have another weather system, and there's flooding. Ajamu Baraka, Jill Stein's vice presidential candidate, who still seems to be like a mysterious force to some people. He is actually the person that I remember from keeping up with the news surrounding the Katrina event. He insisted that the people who were displaced from their homes to other states or other regions within Louisiana, they should be designated as internally displaced persons, and that what happened to them should be deemed internal displacement. The media, again, using their propaganda and their vicious attacks to dehumanize and other the people in New Orleans, kind of stating that, well, they speak kind of a different sort of language there. There's that Spanish and French influence, and the people there are very dark. It's a majority minority city. And so they call the people who, they call them criminals, one. And then when people protested that, they said, well, okay, evacuees. And, it just didn't sound right. It's, no, they're not evacuees. And then they said, well, they're refugees. No, they're American citizens. Perhaps they are survivors. But Ajamu Baraka, in this article for Yes Magazine, Post-Katrina, What It Means to Be Displaced, is commentary. It's dated August 23rd, 2006, so almost 10 years ago, following a study of Katrina. He says that they should be recognized internationally as internally displaced persons. Internal displacement, it gives a designation that is guided by principles that's internationally recognized. And so the United States would have a human rights obligation to give those people benefits, obligations that are underneath the guiding principles on internal displacement, which has been adopted by the UN Commission on Human Rights. ever since 1998. Adopting that designation means that those people that have been displaced during Katrina would be entitled to housing throughout all phases of their displacement, rather than the 6, 9, or 12 months that were allowed by FEMA. And the guiding principles also prohibit discrimination against these people, particularly when the affected areas have pre-existing patterns of discrimination. So Ajamu Baraka insisted that these people be called internally displaced and have the rights and benefits of those people by the United States. These are designations that have been used in Pakistan during the earthquakes and in Sudan, other countries, and it should be used for people here at home. But yeah, that was the one thing that I did not like. Well, not one thing, but one of the things that really bothered me about Katrina was that the people called, people from Louisiana, U.S. citizens, refugees. They called them evacuees. And they were actually citizens of the United States entitled to the full benefits and protections of the United States government. So there were failures, and the hurricane system, again, did not cause the disaster. Hurricane Katrina came and left. People were living like they always have survived after hurricanes. It was the failure of the levee that drowned the city. And then also there was the hostility to the people of New Orleans who tried to escape on foot and were prevented by armed militias, and then also National Guard police forces. I mean, there are pictures of people holding guns on people who were starving to death, who were dehydrated, and who were stroking out or going into shock because they had no access to their medications or, insulin. These were man-made catastrophes exacerbated by failures of infrastructure, perhaps greed, perhaps mismanagement, and then also something more sinister, hatred. So Ajamu Baraka has again spoken on the flooding. There's an article, it's a press release from the Green Party website. Green Party VP candidate Ajamu Baraka decries intolerable neglect of flood victims in Louisiana. And so it's on their website, and I'll post a link to this article in the description. He's saying that the world bore witness to what happened on the Gulf Coast 11 years ago, and how the response of the Bush administration was so callous. There were officials who came down for photo opportunities, and they were congratulating each other on what a great job that they were doing while people were suffering and dying. It was pretty terrible. And so Ajamu Baraka is saying, how can something similar happen more than a decade later? He says that in the last week, at least 40,000 homes have been ruined, and 30,000 people or more have been rescued, but there's no temporary housing plan in effect. And there's no really accounting for how many people are still missing. More than 40,000 people have already applied for federal assistance, and they're trying to get updates on their homes. And so there's a lot of disarray. And Ajamu Baraka is saying that it's pretty appalling that there's been a scarcity of media coverage on what's happening in Louisiana with the flooding. And there's nothing that can explain that. He's saying that people of color and low-income people, the communities, usually bear the brunt of any natural disaster. They have limited means of coping, of escape, of rebuilding. And they also bear the brunt of environmental risks that come with those natural disasters. And that's because of the toxic facilities that are near their place of residence. And there are many, like oil and gas facilities, processing plants in that area, and the runoff from that waste before air quality, that all affects the people who live near them, which is usually poor people in communities of color. And then he also says this is one example of climate change and that it does affect us all. And that on the one hand, we need to curb our use of fossil fuels and make it a priority to make climate change something of significance on any policy platform. He wants more attention focused on environmental concerns because they do disproportionately affect people of color who live in those areas, and then the poor people too. So he says that improper project design, poor planning, a lack of humanitarian priorities, and a historic culture of racism is what increased the trauma of what occurred during Katrina. And then something similar is happening now today. He says that little has changed. He's saying that the flood victims then and now deserve real justice. The human rights need to be addressed, and not just some public relations bones thrown their way. They need assistance with basic needs, fairness in the distribution of aid, and a comprehensive return or resettlement plan. And that's what needs to happen to address this issue. I've seen photo ops of Donald Trump and some video of him in Louisiana handing out boxes from a semi. And, you know, it may be a photo opportunity because he was there and people took photo of him and video and then shared that. But he was there. Sometimes showing up, you know, where, you know, it's half of sometimes showing up is half the battle. People were saying, well, he's handing out Play-Doh. I don't know what all was on the truck. Hopefully there was also medication, food and water along with the whatever he was handing out. People are also saying, where was Barack Obama? And there's this story, that story, he's coming. Well, he's not coming because the governor said. And, you know, there's the question, where's Barack Obama? The next question is, where's Hillary Clinton? And I, for one, am glad that she's not there based on how her and Bill Clinton behaved towards Haiti, which was about 5 years after the Katrina disaster. They had the earthquake in Haiti, and then the UN brought in cholera. And so it was one thing after another. And so after the earthquake, after the cholera, then the Clintons come and steal their aid. The Clintons diverted the resources raised by Red Cross and international donors to the Clinton Foundation. They stole that money. And there are people from the Haitian community that are still protesting that. And the question remains, where's that money? There's been no answer. So, no, Hillary Clinton does not need to go to Louisiana. It's one thing to go and have a photo op. It's another thing entirely to cause more problems than you solve. If you're there to solve problems, maybe, but that doesn't usually happen when Hillary Clinton is anywhere near. Donald Trump, he's got his own motivations. Yes, it might be a photo opportunity, but he was there. And apparently he bought with his own money supplies. So do with that what you will. There's all kinds of reactions. I'm going to post links in the description of how to find When the Levees Broke by Spike Lee. This article by Ajamu Baraka from about 10 years ago discussing Katrina. And then also this press release from Ajamu Baraka discussing what's happening today. So everyone's got a view on the flooding that occurred in Louisiana. My bottom line is those are people and they need to be treated as thus. They should be treated equally to anyone of our citizens here in the United States that meets with unfortunate events. It could be anyone of us, either in a flood, either in an earthquake or hurricane or a wildfire or drought or something. So we all need to feel a little bit more compassion maybe towards others and just try to have empathy for our neighbors. I'm sure that they would reach out a hand to us if we needed it.